Hey everybody, Charles Dobens here, and this is the next vlog. Boy, I've been getting some great feedback from people on the vlogs and the topics and how we're able to just kind of uh, come up with some great topics, teach you some cool stuff in a very short period of time, and hopefully today is going to be no different. Just finished our Monday night call. Great phone call. We talked about some of the changes that are coming up to the owner forum, which is our coaching program, that actually will probably, the whole idea is that we're going to roll it out for January 1st of 2019, whenever you're watching this. And it's going to be the MFIA, Multifamily Investing Academy's Multifamily Best Year Ever, BYE. And the whole idea is putting you on a 12-month program for owning your first property, getting you from the starting line to the very end. So that's the part of what we talked about today. And, we're going to be rolling it out soon, and you'll be hearing more and more about it. So that is part of what we talked about, but two things I want to mention here in this vlog. So the first thing is, how do multifamily deals go awry? And we had two students on there who had just lost deals. And when I say lost deals, they had, some of them had gone through the due diligence process. One of them had gone through the due diligence. Another student couldn't even get to the executed purchase and sale agreement. And most of the time, it all comes down to the documentation that is needed for the due diligence. And what we do with our students is, when you submit a letter of intent, the letter of intent includes all the documents that we will need during the due diligence process. And I mentioned to them, I said, listen, when we get those documents in, when we get that letter of intent back from the seller, either as a counter or an executed LOI, if the schedule that we've included of all the documentation that we need has not been touched, has not been marked up one bit, we're going to have a problem with that case. We're going to have a problem with that property. That may sound crazy, but the fact is that there are things on that list that sellers don't have. I mean, for instance, an as-built survey. Now, you might not know what an as-built survey is, but let me just tell you something. In all of my dealings, I have only had one owner that was able to give me the as-built surveys of his property. All of them, just one guy. Well, our schedule asks for them. And if they come back to us and the seller hasn't crossed that one out, it's almost like, really? You got an as-built survey on this property that you just bought 2 years ago? I find that hard to believe. So that's a red flag. And the reason why it's a red flag is once we start going under contract and we start going through the due diligence, all of a sudden, the seller can't find any of the documents that we were looking for. Well, why didn't you tell us that back when we made the offer? You should have crossed out the information then. But all we want to know is tell us what documents you have so that we can go and plan the due diligence process so we know whether we can make a deal or not. So don't drag us down the primrose path and get us under contract and have us not put earnest money up yet, but come close and get to the point where we find out, well, you don't really have everything you need. And that's that is exactly what happened with these two students' deals. When they finally got the deal under contract, or in the one case, it never even got to that point, and they were trying to get the seller to give us the information, they couldn't do it. We were better off just walking away from the deal, which is what they did. And unfortunately, that's what happens. And that's how the deals go awry. And it's usually because of the seller. And it's usually because of that schedule of documents that we need for the due diligence process. The next thing that we talked about, which comes up quite a bit, is understanding the difference between the effective date and the execution date in the letter of intent. Okay. Now, the thing is that in the letter of intent, we define the effective date. We don't necessarily define the execution date. Typically, the execution date is the date that all parties sign on the contract. And, sometimes, that's really it. I mean, sometimes it might involve the escrow company, but really it's just the, what you might do is say, some execution date definitions are such that both parties sign and they can sign a counterpart. But then also it's the date that the escrow company has received both signed documents. Okay. Sometimes that's the definition of the execution date. Now, the effective date, though, is different. And this is how we draft the letter of intent so that we clearly state at the very first communication how we define the effective date. And that definition then translates into the purchase and sale agreement, so that that definition goes into the next round. And it makes total sense when you do it this way, because the effective date is a floating date. The execution date is when everybody signs. The effective date is a date that is dependent upon when the seller provides us with all those documents in that schedule that we said in the letter of intent. That schedule then becomes part, once it gets signed off by the seller, it becomes part of the purchase and sale contract. When we get all those documents in our hands, that determines when the effective date is. Okay? Now, the reason why we have that as a floating date, just think about it. We make sure that the inspection date, the financing date, the closing date all float on that effective date. So the seller determines when that effective date is because he gives us all the documents. It doesn't start until he gives us all the documents. When he gives us those documents, now the clock starts ticking for our 30-day inspection period. Here's why. And I'm going to tell you something else about the earnest money. Here's why. The execution date, if we had to start all the clocks ticking on the execution date and we have not received all of the documentation, that guy is shortchanging us. We are not getting the benefit of our bargain for the inspection period. So what happens is the guy sets the clock. Okay, well, everything's going to start on the execution date. Everybody signs. And now we have 30 days to do the due diligence. And we sit back and we wait. And the seller never shows up with any of the documents. Well, there goes our 30 days. I negotiated 30 days. Well, now I'm down to 20 because for the last 10 days, I've been sitting around waiting for him to give me the information. So that's why we say the clock does not start ticking until we have all the documentation from the seller. And remember, the seller has learned or knows what we're looking for in our very first communication. So he should have had that documentation ready for us. If he wants to get that effective date to match the execution date, just hand us all the documents. That's all you got to do. Ball is in your court. It's like civil contempt. The keys are in your pocket, Mr. Contemptor. So the other thing, I just mentioned this, the earnest money. We don't write a check until that document, all those documents are in our hands. So therefore, the earnest money deposit is not required to go in until 5 days after the effective date. Because remember, we don't want to have to move any money. If this guy's not going to get off his duff and move some papers, just remember this, and this is a great rule that you can live by. I hear so many people out there teaching you that, the inspection period, free and clear, you just have to walk away from the deal, you get your money back. Yeah. But listen, it's a very litigious society. And I've seen sellers sue at the drop of a hat. Any time that you move your money out of your bank account into someone else's bank account, even to be held as escrow, you have now put your money at risk. That money wasn't at any type of risk beforehand. Now when you move it into another party's account, you've taken on a little degree of risk. So be very careful when you do that. Don't just do it willy-nilly. All right? So just be smart about that type of thing. So that's it. That's an effective date, execution date, and it's late. It's late. Okay. I forgot what the first topic was, but that's okay. Hey, listen, I'm starting a podcast in January. I'm going to get out some information. If you want to find out more about it, stay tuned. Keep watching the vlogs. I'll be telling you about it as we get closer and as I get my producer to put everything together, but it'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a lot of this. It'll be a lot of interviews. It'll be really a blast. And it'll be also a way for you to get to know some of my programs, some of my students, and get involved in some multifamily deals. So that's it for tonight. Thanks for listening, and we will chat later.